discussion going.
Is there any way to, some of these companies are also like carpet cleaners, for example. Can you say, well, I'm a carpet cleaner who happens to do ductwork cleaning, so I don't have to register, or if anytime you do it, you have to register?
Yeah, if you're going to engage in this act, regardless of what else you might do, you have to register. In the case of Mark Swepston, Atlas Butler does both. What I've found is that I don't think most of the HVAC companies do air duct cleaning. Most of them are independent companies, and I can let Mark Swepston, Mr. Swepston speak to that. But yeah, if you're engaging in the practice, you have to register.
And is there something about, I mean, you can't, is there a nuance you can get away with saying, well, I'm not really doing air duct cleaning because I'm only, my hose is only going part of the way into the duct, or is there some way they could try to get around it?
Yeah, and what I'll do is I'll turn it over to Mr. Schulte, but no, I don't believe so, because, and I'm going to let Mr. Schulte describe the process a little bit. When you do air duct cleaning, if you're doing it legitimately, there's equipment that you have to have. You have to be able to cut holes in the vent and plug them when you're done. It's not like you can just do it. It's not like someone can start up their own business, much like a contractor, grab some tools and go. So I don't believe that would be the case, and I'll let Mr. Schulte describe a little bit more about how the air duct cleaning process, how it occurs to show that, either you're in the business or you're not.
Sure. Real quick, too, one thing I'd like to add about the registration, which I think is critical. When we were putting this legislation together, we wanted to make sure companies were licensed, but we're also looking to give the consumers a way out if a company isn't registered, if they're not licensed. So one of the provisions in the legislation allows the consumer to escape payment if the company provides the services and they're not licensed, which is a big deal, because currently, if you provide the service and you do a poor job and you pay with a credit card, now you have a fight on your hands with your credit card company. And this is a big deal, because usually there's some kind of sheet of paper that every consumer just signs at the end of the job. Are you perfectly satisfied, everything done? Well, sure, you just sign off and that's the end of that. Well, then later you got dust coming out of your vents, or you have reasons to suspect something was wrong. So after you sign that, if you realize there's a problem, if you realize there's a problem with the work that was done, now you have to go fight with your credit card company. So one of these provisions will allow a person to avoid payment in a situation where they're not working with a registered contractor. So that's a big deal. As far as how this work is done, it's think of it as a large-scale vacuum cleaning process. Step one, these guys bring some kind of equipment into the house, or run a big 8-inch, 12-inch, 14-inch hose, and put the system under the heating and air conditioning system under a vacuum, under what we call negative pressure. And the idea is to draw the air through the ductwork and either to a vacuum collection unit or outside of the house, depending on what type of equipment you're using. While that system's running, the second phase is for these companies to go in with what we call agitation tools. Could be brushes or some type of compressed air system to blast the surfaces within the ductwork and the rest of the heating and air conditioning system to loosen up contaminants so they can be removed from the house. That is what we describe as source removal. That's the idea. When it's all said and done, you go into a consumer's house or in an office building, because this is commercial as well, and you remove the contaminants, whatever it is, from the heating and air conditioning system.
So what's
registration is different, I just want to make sure I understand, different than licensing.
Yes.
There's no standards, you don't, in order to get your registration approved, I guess maybe there isn't even an approval of registration. You just register, you say, I'm doing this work, fine, you register. You don't have to say, I've got this much equity, I've got this many machines, I've got this much bond.
That's correct.
You just register. Okay.
That's correct. Yeah, there is a difference. And, right now our intent is we first have to find a way to track them, primarily targeting those who are operating fraudulently. So this would not be a licensing requirement, which would be a steeper hurdle. We're balancing this here between protecting the consumer and also not keeping people out of the industry. And when you get into licensing and registration, it gets tough. So this is where we're starting. I feel pretty good about it.
What does this cost? I mean, you said $20 or $50 is not feasible. That's a bait and switch. But if haven't cleaned my furnace out in 10 years. What's it cost to have someone come in and blow that all out?
I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Swepston or Mr. Schulte.
I have a little bit of hearing, so what was,
Just, you've mentioned what prices aren't feasible. What does this service cost? So consumers have an idea if somebody comes to their door tomorrow, whether they're getting a too low or a too high price.
I'm going to say a standard two-story home in, you know, Columbus, maybe 2,000 square yards for it. It's going to cost $400 to $600 probably total cost to get the entire process done. And so when we kind of brought up the idea of the 49 or 1990, you know, lead-in, they're just getting it in the door to make a sale. And if they don't charge something like that, they're not doing it right. They're not following the processes that North American Duct Cleaners Association puts forward. You know, for example, they've got some very good guidelines as to what to do it. Some people come in with a truck, essentially take a shop vac with a vacuum, pull some registers out, and vacuum around the registers. And they leak. I mean, they make a bunch of noise and do a bunch of things during the day, but they can, you know, then they charge you $200 for an hour for being there an hour. There are all kinds of different things that you look at that go into it, that whether they're Consumer Practices Act or different things like that come forward, following the right procedures and processes. I would think that this legislation would help us put that forward, make sure that it's in right, because yes, you know, I want, if you want somebody that bristles against additional, you know, administrative things forced on us by the state or the government, it's just like, I go bananas about it, you know, on the one hand. So, you know, I'll fight against those things as much as I can. On the other hand, if the legislation, like I said, is done properly, they have the right fees for licensing, then there is a process and channel that if a customer's got a question about it, can go back through, and there are very specific steps in place for this to happen, not just what I'll say is a standard complaint to go to the state attorney general's office and just follow a, you know, Consumer Practices Act. That can work and can be done very well. On the flip side, it can be very frustrating because they'll say there's no procedure. If this ties into it, good, legitimate procedures and making sure everything's done all the way through, then it can be very beneficial for everyone involved. Then it protects the homeowner.